Last week saw the release of The Caped Crusader, the new animated Batman television show on Amazon Prime. Now this isn't a review show, but I honestly quite enjoyed The Caped Crusader. It starts off a little bit rocky, there is a sense that a lot of this has been done before, and it is a little bit familiar in places. The animation isn't quite as stylish as the animated series, and its early villain-crafted stories aren't as compelling as those entries in that classic animated Batman show. However, as the series progresses, it becomes a lot more interesting and compelling, it finds its unique voice, and it offers a unique vantage point on Gotham City. So this week, we're going to talk about that aspect of the show. Now, we are going to assume that you have seen all 10 episodes of the first season, which are streaming now. If not, don't worry, hit pause, you can bookmark and come back when you've had a chance to watch the show. Although to be honest, there are very few surprises for anybody with any real familiarity about the Batman mythos. All in all, if you want a very quick review of it, I think it has the Knight stuff. But with that in mind, we're just going to jump right on in. There's no need to be robbing any more of your time. We're just going to night wing it from here. I'm going to share some thoughts that have been Bruce Wayne on my mind.
Oh my.
It is a cliché to describe the location of a story as a major character within the narrative, to suggest that New York City is the fifth character on Sex and the City, that Los Angeles is the real star of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or that the woods of Vancouver are the real breakout performers of virtually any science fiction show that aired on American television between 1990 and the year 2000. Still, the recently launched streaming series Batman: The Caped Crusader is at its strongest when it feels like a show about the fictional Gotham City. If nothing else, the show constructs a compelling argument for why Gotham needs Batman. That said, of course, Batman has one of the most iconic rogues galleries in comics. Indeed, several recognizable villains appear in the first season of Batman: The Caped Crusader. You have a revamped version of the Penguin, a very classic take on the Catwoman, a novel approach to Harley Quinn, and an homage to the Golden Age Clayface. Indeed, the bulk of the season is devoted to the familiar arc that sees District Attorney Harvey Dent transformed into the monstrous Two-Face. Hell, the season even closes with a short tease of the Joker, one of the most iconic villains in the history of comics, and a fictional character who has won precisely as many Academy Awards as Anthony Hopkins. I guess we know what the real crime is here, eh? So there is certainly a lot familiar about the show. And of course, Batman: The Caped Crusader is being positioned as something of a spiritual successor to Batman the Animated Series, perhaps the greatest superhero television show ever produced. The season features prominent supporting turns for Harley Quinn and Renee Montoya, characters who were created specifically for the animated series. And much has been made of the involvement of Bruce Timm, who created the animated series. Indeed, some of Timm's unique sensibility bleeds over into the show.
You've got to wonder what else is he hiding under that thing, besides obvious issues with authority, and maybe a fetish or two. Yeah.
The Caped Crusader features perhaps the most enthusiastic embrace of baby play since, well, Tim Burton's Batman Returns. Although the art style in The Caped Crusader is more heavily influenced by Golden Age artists like Dick Sprang than the Art Deco approach of the animated series, both shows share a similar retro film noir aesthetic. Of course, they come by this honestly, inheriting much of their visual style from Tim Burton's two turn-of-the-90s Batman movies. For his part, Burton was very obviously influenced by mid-century American cinema, including films like Citizen Kane and White Heat. He was also heavily influenced by German Expressionism, the films of the 1920s and 1930s, which ironically were also major influences on the early Batman comics, bringing all of this full circle. However, even allowing for all this shared historical context, The Caped Crusader clearly exists within conversation with the animated series, to the point that one of the series' closing shots is a deliberate echo of the iconic opening of the animated series. However, there is a marked difference in how the two shows approach the character of Batman. After all, the tone and mood of the animated series was largely defined by writer Paul Dini. Dini tended to construct episodes as elaborate character studies of classic villains, often turning potentially ridiculous antagonists like Mr. Freeze, the Mad Hatter, even the Riddler, into truly tragic and often sympathetic figures. It's telling that some of these reinventions of these classic villains in the animated series remain their default characterization to this very day. The Caped Crusader makes a few attempts to emulate this approach early in its season, with the first two episodes focusing on a gender-flipped take on the Penguin, and a retro version of Clayface that harks back to the character's four-color origins. These are easily the weakest episodes of the 10 that comprise the season, in large part because they feel like an unconvincing imitation of something that the animated series perfected. If I want to watch an origin story for Clayface, I'll probably just go back and watch Feet of Clay, the 2-part episode of the animated series starring Ron Perlman. It's to the credit of the Caped Crusader that the show seems to acknowledge as much in its 3rd episode, Kiss of the Catwoman. This features perhaps the most conventional villain origin of the season and provides the framework for the obligatory flashbacks to Bruce's own childhood trauma. Of course, everybody knows Bruce's origin story beat for beat. It's all very tiring and familiar. The Waynes have died on camera more often than Jeb Bush.
Please clap.
So there's a sense of obligation to all this. We're covering old ground and rehashing old story beats that even people who don't watch Batman media know off by heart. In short, 3 episodes into the season, this is the stuff that every Batman adaptation has to work through. This sense of frustration is woven into Kiss of the Catwoman. After punching out reporter E.L. O'Brien, Bruce Wayne is sentenced to therapy with Harleen Quinzel, where he's obligated to relitigate his formative trauma over his own better judgment. Neither Wayne nor Quinzel seem particularly satisfied by the court-mandated experience.
You know what, Bruce? I'm going to sign your paperwork.
Oh gosh, thanks, Doc.
Because I don't think you're a danger to yourself or anyone else. But I also don't think that we've made any progress together.
At the end of the episode, Bruce all but concedes that it served no purpose whatsoever.
Did you really not get anything out of talking to her, sir? Because I've often thought it might be beneficial to—
I'm fine. Now drop it.
In that same episode, fallen socialite Selina Kyle reinvents herself as the costumed Catwoman. Now, the dynamic between Batman and Catwoman has long been flirtatious. The romance between the pair was foregrounded in Tom King's recent extended run on the Batman comic. It's a dynamic that the feature films have returned to again, and again, and again, and again. I guess Batman has a type. Or, to quote supervillain and noted baby play enthusiast Oswald Cobblepot,
just the pussy I've been looking for.
However, there's something interesting in how the Caped Crusader approaches this. There is no chemistry between Bruce and Selina here. Batman has no real interest in Catwoman. In the episode's final scene, Bruce all but admits that he's very glad that he won't need to see her again.
She'll be back, but Gotham's got a break from her nonsense. And so do I.
As such, Kiss of the Catwoman represents something of a sharp pivot for the show. It is the point at which, having established its bona fides, the series can take a turn towards its own unique interests. It's an illustration of what the show doesn't want to be. Instead, the climax of the episode finds Gotham City Police Department Lieutenant Arnold Flass threatening to execute Selina in retaliation for his humiliation earlier in the episode. Then, photographs of Batman violently subduing Flass turn him into a public enemy. If Paul Dini was the defining creative voice in the animated series, Ed Brubaker is a major influence on the Caped Crusader. Brubaker is a veteran comic book writer. He's perhaps notable for inventing the character of the Winter Soldier, reviving the Golden Age Captain America sidekick Bucky Barnes as a part cybernetic Russian assassin. Before working at Marvel, Brubaker worked on several Gotham set titles in the early 2000s. Batman, Catwoman, and Gotham Central among others. Brubaker's influence on the Caped Crusader is obvious. The second episode of the season, And Be a Villain, was written by Greg Rucka, who's a frequent collaborator of Brubaker on comics like Daredevil, and who wrote the Batman companion book Detective Comics alongside Brubaker's Batman run, and was a co-writer on Gotham Central. Indeed, the Caped Crusader takes many of its cues from Brubaker's work on Batman, whether aesthetically or thematically. There is, for example, a heavy emphasis on the East End.
I'm at the East End.
I mean, what do you expect, lady? It's the East End.
And he's been spotted in the East End more than anywhere else.
A derelict part of Gotham created by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli for Year One, but which featured so heavily in Brubaker's work on the character that the blockbuster collection of his Catwoman run is called Catwoman of the East End. Even the tease of the Joker at the end of the season is framed in such a way as to evoke Brubaker's introduction of the character in The Man Who Laughs. While Dini's approach to Batman tended to focus on developing the villains, Brubaker was always more interested in the relationship between Batman and the city itself. Gotham Central is one of the best Batman comics ever published, and it barely features any superheroes. It instead focuses on the police officers working major crimes in Gotham, operating in the shadow of the Batman and his rogues gallery. The best parts of the Caped Crusader carry those elements over. The Caped Crusader is very interested in the structures and the systems of Gotham. Not only is Harvey Dent serving as district attorney like he does in most adaptations, he's now running for mayor. Not only is Commissioner James Gordon head of the Gotham City Police Department, His daughter Barbara is a public defender trying to protect the rights of those in police custody. The relationship between James and Barbara Gordon is rooted in arguments about the greater institutions of the city around them.
Another day, another criminal let off on a technicality.
We're doing this again.
Even Bruce spends most of his time in the Batcave contemplating a map of the city, with the grids clearly demarked. The show's opening and closing credits focus on the empty spaces of Gotham, guiding the viewer through the offices, apartments, and meeting rooms that make up the city. The characters themselves are intertwined with the city's infrastructure. At one point, for example, Dent monologues about the importance of the train lines to the health of the larger city, describing it almost as a living organism.
Just as Gotham rails form the arteries of a great city, the people who ride it are its lifeblood. The mother, who lives in the East End but works downtown, the factory workers on the late shift, all form the beating heart of Gotham.
A late season episode features playful cameos from a gaggle of Batman's future sidekicks.
Dickie, Jason. My friends call me Jace.
Steffi! Carrie!
Before these characters become Bruce's adopted family, they are wards of the state, orphans in the care of Dr. Leslie Tompkins. Now, obviously, Gotham isn't real, but it is modeled on New York City. In the words of legendary Batman writer Denny O'Neil, Gotham is Manhattan below 14th Street at 11 minutes past midnight on the coldest night in November. However, because Gotham is a fictional construct, it can take on a life of its own, as demonstrated by Anton Furst's design work for Tim Burton's Batman. In The Caped Crusader, there's a real effort to explain how Gotham City could produce a hero like Batman. The show suggests that the real monsters in Gotham aren't the supervillains, but instead the corruption, indifference, and poverty that have taken root.
Man, just look at this place. I remember when these factories were open around the clock. We had a government worth a damn we'd rebuild, pump some life back in. But instead, we get to keep the slums and all the
Hey, you see that?
There's a constant sense that the city is falling apart,
Latest reports indicate that inflation and unemployment in Gotham continue to rise.
in large part because those who have a responsibility to protect and maintain it are not doing their duty. This goes a long way towards explaining why Gotham City needs Batman. After all, if the city's institutions were working, it would be harder to justify a billionaire vigilante with a bat fetish taking to the rooftops at night to enforce the laws that the police can't. If other Batman adaptations, like for example Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, focus on the interior psychology of Batman, The Caped Crusader instead engages with the idea of the world that built him. Of course, that isn't entirely separate from Bruce. Wealth is a recurring preoccupation for the season, even beyond the Wayne fortune. Frustrated by the indifference of her privileged clients who refer to their workers as chattel, and who complain about how they want to unionize, Harleen Quinzel reinvents herself as the vigilante Harley Quinn, warning the city's wealthy that change is gonna come.
The kings don't run this court anymore. The jester does.
In Night Ride, Batman faces a supernatural menace known as the Gentleman Ghost, the spirit of James Craddock, who only targets the underprivileged. Like Bruce, Craddock was a wealthy vigilante, but he didn't bring salvation to the needy.
But James Craddock was no Robin Hood. The opposite, in fact. He stole from the poor to give to himself.
Even in death, Craddock seeks to uphold this social order.
There was a time when the lower classes knew their place. A better time.
And the show directly ties this back into Bruce's characterization. If Bruce has a character arc over these 10 episodes, it's learning to see Alfred as more than just the hired help, as more than just Pennyworth. Instead, Bruce comes to see him as a human being. Indeed, after a season of referring to his battle-hardened butler by his surname,
Pennyworth, 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 Pennyworth,
Pennyworth.
One of the biggest metrics of Bruce's growth in the season finale is choosing to address his faithful manservant by his first name instead.
Thank you, Pennyworth. Alfred. Thanks, Alfred.
However, it isn't just the city's wealthy that prey on the impoverished and disenfranchised citizens. In the show's 4th episode, The Night of the Hunters, Flass unleashes the supervillain Firebug on a tenement building to draw Batman out in the open, risking countless innocent lives in a hope to regain his lost pride. Later in the season, in Moving Target, a contracted hit forces James and Barbara Gordon to go on the run because they can't trust the police department that James operates.
We can't even call for backup because you don't know who to trust among your own people. And you wonder why I don't believe in the system.
It turns out that this paranoia is well-founded. Lieutenant Jim Corrigan proves himself to be a rat. By the way, while Jim Corrigan shares a name with the Golden Age superhero known as the Spectre, this version of the character is also an Ed Brubaker creation from the comics. And so this framework allows the Caped Crusader to get away with hitting familiar beats because it's at least approaching them in a new way. The season builds the familiar story of Harvey Dent's transformation into Two-Face, which has been the subject of countless Batman stories. In comics, animated television shows, animated films, live-action movies. However, because of its focus on Dent's relationship to Gotham, the Caped Crusader manages to find a fresh angle. Indeed, Harvey is incarcerated by the end of the season's penultimate episode. Instead, the season finale finds Dent being hunted by the police after he promises to testify in the hopes of revealing where the bodies are buried and exposing corruption. The final boss of the Caped Crusader isn't Two-Face, it's systemic corruption. In fact, Dent is ultimately shot in the back by Flass, effectively executed by a police officer. The climax of the season is a confrontation between Batman and a policeman. Flass insists that he was justified in taking the shot.
Hey, hold on. That wasn't right to shoot.
He also asserts his authority over the Bat.
You're just some lousy vigilante. I'm a goddamn cop!
This is the most powerful moment in the series, particularly in the aftermath of national protests about the use of lethal force by police officers who have rarely faced legal consequences for their actions. In that moment, Bruce's anger towards Flass, towards Gotham, towards the police force is palpable, justifiable, and it feels incredibly timely despite the show's retro setting. It's a moment that really makes an argument for the idea of Batman as a vigilante. After all, the Dark Knight is frequently and increasingly criticized as a billionaire aristocrat who beats up poor people. It's very telling, for example, that Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy ends with Bruce Wayne effectively stepping down from being Batman because a child from privilege can never truly understand justice, instead donating what little he has left to make the city a better place. In Matt Reeves' The Batman, Bruce is taken to task for his failure to use his position of privilege and his family's wealth to help the city that he's sworn to protect.
You know, you really could be doing more for this city. Your family has a history of philanthropy, but as far as I can tell, you're not doing anything.
So any modern adaptation of Batman has to grapple with the question of why this billionaire has taken it upon himself to enforce the laws of Gotham City. Now, the Caped Crusader is less interested in Bruce Wayne's internal psychology than other adaptations. It's less compelled by the arguments about why Bruce would choose to be Batman. After all, that's well-trodden ground. This is a large part of why Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins remains the gold standard of superhero origin stories. It explains everything about the inner working of Bruce's mind, from the motif,
why bats, Master Wayne,
to the cape, right down to the spikes on his gauntlets. The Caped Crusader understands that there are other Batman adaptations that are more interested in exploring that angle of the character. So instead, the series takes the opposite approach, exploring how broken Gotham City must be in order to justify Batman, to make Batman seem like a logical and rational thing to do. And yes, this aspect of Gotham is explored in various other Batman multimedia franchises. Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins is largely preoccupied with how corrupt the Gotham City Police Department is. The Batman is built around a cover-up that implicates the police department and several of the city's highest functionaries in a criminal conspiracy. And The Dark Knight Rises is about the idea that Gotham's wealthy have systemically failed those less advantaged than they are.
The rich don't even go broke the same as the rest of us, huh?
However, it is exciting and refreshing to see that framed in the context of a very traditional, episodic, animated Batman adventure series in the style of the animated series. It's a fresh and fascinating angle on the classic Batman mythos. In a universe so saturated with Batman content that Pennyworth, the origin of Batman's butler, has somehow run 3 full seasons, the Caped Crusader manages to find a fresh angle that allows it to stand apart from Bruce Timm's earlier contributions to the character. It breathes life into the mythos. In fact, you could even go so far as to say that the series feels truly animated. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was The Backdrop.